All right, hey everybody, this is the first of a few videos about inflation, as promised. Okay, here, let's get into it. So first, a couple of definitions about inflation. Inflation is a general rise in prices, okay? It's sometimes confused. People think that the price of gasoline or the price of bread or milk goes up and, oh my goodness, there's inflation. That's not true. Most people under ordinary circumstances have no idea if there isn't inflation, especially low inflation like we have in this country, 2, 3, 4% per year, because it has to be measured as an average price increase. It's like a weighted average. So it's a general rise in prices in an economy. Another way of thinking about inflation, though, is to think in terms of the money or the currency you're using. So since prices are basically the number of dollars or the amount of a currency that has to be traded to get a good or a service, then when the price goes up, meaning you need to take more dollars to get a good, then that means the dollars themselves are worth less. So, one Coca-Cola is one Coca-Cola. It always is, right? And right now you have to trade basically $1 to get one Coca-Cola. But when I was a kid, you could trade 50 cents to get a Coca-Cola. So that means that since the Coke hasn't changed, it's the value of the currency that has. When I was a kid, money was worth more because for $1 you could get 2 Cokes. Now for $1 you can only get 1 Coke. And I suspect in 20 years, $1 will get you half of a Coke or something like that. So the dollar or the currency is losing value, and that's what inflation is. It's the erosion of the value of the currency. That's what inflation actually is. Okay, so now I'm going to make a statement that may not make a ton of sense right at the face of it, and that's that the price level, how high or low prices are, doesn't make a difference. You hear older people who have been around a while say things like, well, when I was a kid, Coke cost a nickel. Well, that's great. That's cool. But everything costs a nickel. I mean, everything that costs $1 today used to cost a nickel. So just because prices were lower back then doesn't mean everything was cheaper, because it turns out that people were paid less back then. So when the price level in an economy goes up or down, it actually is referring to the price of everything, including the price, and this is key, of labor. So wages go up when there's inflation. Wages go down when there's deflation. And so if Coke was a nickel back when your grandpa was a kid, and today it's $1, well, your grandpa was probably only earning maybe 25 cents as a kid. And somebody today might be earning $8 or $9 an hour. And so it turns out that maybe you're actually, Coke and wages have gone up at about the same pace over time. So that's an important note, that price level doesn't really matter in the long run in economics. What does matter, though, is the relative price. Relative means the price in comparison to something else. So what I mean by this all is, if you buy gasoline and you make $10 an hour, and the price of gas is $2, that means that you should think about the work, the $10 an hour, as how much gas is your work worth? Well, your 1 hour of work is worth 5 gallons of gas. That's because for 1 hour you get $10. $10 is able to purchase 5 gallons at $2 a gallon. Well, if the price of gas goes up to $3 and your wage goes up to $15, they've both gone up 50%. Well, your labor is still worth 5 gallons of gas. So in real terms, neither the price of gas nor your income has changed, because you're still in 1 hour of work able to buy 5 gallons of gas, no more, no less. Or you could look at it from the gasoline point of view. 5 gallons of gas is worth 1 hour of work. Nothing's changed. So price level doesn't matter. Relative prices matter, right? If you were to, say, get a raise from $10 to $15 an hour, and the price of gas and the price of everything else didn't go up, well, then you're better off. You can actually buy more stuff. But when everything goes up, when the price of everything goes up at the same rate, there's no difference. It doesn't make a difference. So your real wage hasn't changed in this case because it went up at the same pace as prices. Okay. So real wage is the wage adjusted for inflation. All right. What does matter, though, is the inflation rate. Rate means how fast something is changing. So the speed with which prices go up, that does matter. All right. The inflation rate is the rate of change in the price level over time. So the price level is how high or low prices are, throughout your lifetime and mine, prices have generally gone up. And so the speed at which they're going up is the inflation rate. So when we say inflation, we don't actually mean something is expensive or not. We mean something has become more expensive than it was. It's about how fast it's changing. So here's how you calculate inflation rate. You simply subtract the last year's price level from this year's price level. So you find out how much change there was. So new minus old over old. So you're finding out how much change was there from last year, and then you divide that by last year to find out how much change there was in comparison to where we were last year, times 100, and that gives you the inflation rate, which is a percentage. So 3%. That means that's our current inflation rate, about 3%. That means something that costs $100 last year costs about $103 this year. So 3% increase in prices. If inflation rates get high, by high I mean like 15, 20%, 50% per year, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000% per year. There are places where inflation has run as high as trillions of percent per year. So from one year to the next, the average price of a good goes up by 1,000,000,000,000%. So maybe it was $1 for a loaf of bread in January. By December, that same loaf of bread would cost you more than $1,000,000,000,000. That's crazy. That's called hyperinflation. We've seen that in places like Zimbabwe in 2009. We saw it in Greece in the 1960s, Hungary in the 1950s, Yugoslavia in the 1990s, and the Weimar Republic of Germany in the 1920s. So all famous examples of hyperinflation. When that happens, it causes all sorts of problems. And there's three costs that economists have identified. Cost is something you give up, right? And so the cost in this case is going to be convenience, the cost is going to be time, the cost is going to be sometimes monetary. So here's the three costs, and they all have the first two have weird sort of names, the first one in particular. Shoe leather cost. This term was created in the early 20th century when men would wear shoes that had leather soles. And the leather soles on men's shoes would wear out because when you had high inflation and you received cash, let's say you are a salesman and you sold something, you got cash. Well, you would go out on the street, hit the street, and walk down to your bank as quickly as you could with that cash and get that cash put into a savings account that would pay interest. Because if you just kept that cash in a drawer or in your pocket, because inflation was so high, the cash was losing value. So if you had 100% inflation per day. So let's say the price of goods are doubling every day. If someone paid you $100 in the morning and $100 could buy you 100 Cokes, by the end of the day, that $100 could only buy you 50 Cokes. And if you waited until the next day and you still hung on to your money, that same 100 could only buy you 25 Cokes. And the next day, 12 and a half Cokes. And the next day, 6 and a quarter. So the money is losing value. So you were going to hustle to get rid of that money. That's shoe leather cost. You're wearing out your shoes looking for something to do with your money to protect it against inflation. Menu cost is from the standpoint of a sales, a store, a business. So say you're a restaurant, a coffee shop. If there's high rates of inflation, like prices are doubling every day, that means you really can't have a printed menu, right? You'd have to, if your menu was printed on paper and it had prices on it, like say you have lattes for $3, well, if the price of or the cost of your coffee beans and your milk is going up every day by 100%, that means the price you need to charge for your coffee is going up. And so you couldn't really print a menu because you'd be reprinting your menu every day. So you'd have to keep your prices on a chalkboard or something like that. So the menu cost is the burden that's placed on businesses when there's inflation of having to constantly be changing their listed prices. The unit of account cost is fairly easy to understand with a simple example. So we measure value using dollars. Like if I say to you, what is your, you're wearing shoes right now, maybe. You're probably not, you're sitting at home, but you're wearing a shirt, I hope. So you're wearing a shirt. What is your shirt worth? If I say what it's worth, nobody in here is going to say, well, my shirt is worth 2 chickens. You're not going to say that. It's weird. You're going to say my shirt is worth $20. You use dollars to measure value, what something's worth. You don't have to. You could use chickens if you want, but people would think you're strange. But if I asked you how tall you are, measure your height, you would answer in feet and inches. You'd say I'm 5'7" or something. Okay, that's cool. But like 20 years from now, assuming you haven't grown. Let's say you're done growing. 20 years from now, you're still going to be 5'7". But 20 years from now, that shirt is probably not going to be worth $20, or a comparable shirt 20 years from now. A shirt might be worth 30 because of inflation. What's happening to the value of a dollar with inflation? It's going down. Dollars are losing value. Well, imagine if inches lost value over time. Imagine if an inch became smaller over time. That means over time you would get taller. But you're not really getting taller. You would just need more inches to measure yourself with. So instead of being, say, 65 or something inches, you would be 70 inches, and then you'd become 80 inches, and then in 20 years you'd be 90 inches. Eventually you'd be like 12 feet tall. But you're not actually 12 feet tall. We would just need 12 feet, 144 inches, to measure you because the units keep getting smaller. Well, that would be a real odd burden. Like imagine like sports almanacs. It says Wilt Chamberlain was 7'2". Well, now you'd have to say 7'2" measured in 1965 inches. And you'd have to constantly update that to keep it relevant, and it would just be a real annoyance. Just like we have to do with prices. You go back and look at an old menu from the 1960s, and the price of things are different than they are today, and we have to go through sort of a burdensome conversion to figure out, well, okay, a cup of coffee that was 25 cents back then is kind of like $4 today, and that's a cost. We're spending time and effort not understanding things. All right, that wraps it up for this video. We'll have more in just a moment.